Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar about the great suite of interactive online tools that Climate Central has put together to help communicate about climate change impacts and related topics. My name is Chris Carnevale, and I'm the Coastal Climate and Energy Manager for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Next slide. For those of you not familiar with the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we're a regional membership organization that promotes responsible energy choices to ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. We'd like to acknowledge our members on this call and encourage those of you who are not members to please join us today. For ways in which you can become a member and get involved, please visit our website, cleanenergy.org. I'd like to take a moment to review the basic functions of the Zoom platform on the bottom of your screen, something probably many of you are very familiar with these days, but I'll take a moment anyway. So to ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout the presentation. If you're having trouble hearing or seeing the slides, click the chat button and type in your problems so we can help you troubleshoot. We have time at the end of each of the three presentations today to answer questions and to have discussion. So to ask a question, click the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen and type in your question, and we'll work to get through as many as we can. Lastly, we're recording this webinar and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. So joining us today from Climate Central are Dan Rizza, Karen Florini, and Dawn Bain. For those of you not familiar with Climate Central, Climate Central is an independent group of scientists and communicators who research and report the facts about our changing climate and how it affects people's lives. They're a policy-neutral 501c3 nonprofit organization. First up will be Dan Rizza. Dan manages the program on sea level rise at Climate Central. Previously, he worked at the Climate Policy Center, where he managed sea level rise mapping initiatives and advised congressional committees on sea level rise and climate hearings. Dan was a member of the team contracted by the Department of Energy to advise and support the startup of ARPA-E. Karen Florini is vice president for programs at Climate Central. Prior to joining Climate Central in mid-2017, Karen served as deputy special envoy for climate change at the State Department for the final 2 years of the Obama administration. Previously, she worked on health and on climate change at Environmental Defense Fund. She's a recovering lawyer. Dawn Bain, PE, is a climate engineer and expert on climate change, adaptation, and sea level rise. Dedicated to building a bright future in a dramatically changing climate, he is a highly accomplished business executive and management consultant. He's managed hundreds of projects and has expertise working in 21 countries. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, all right, here we go. So as Chris mentioned, we are a climate science and research communications NGO. We were founded in 2008, and we have a staff of 30, mostly in Princeton, although nowadays we're working remotely. We're nonpartisan, non-advocacy. Well, we generate localized evidence-based information on climate science and impacts and solutions. And we're chiefly B2B, so a wide range of entities and stakeholders utilize our materials from media outlets to NGOs and educators and to government officials. The scientists and software developers in our program on sea level rise develop localized maps and information related to sea level rise and coastal flooding for a wide range of stakeholders. And some of you may be familiar with some of the maps we've listed here, but today I will be presenting on the first one listed here, the coastal risk screening tool, which allows you to explore coastal flood and sea level rise risk by year or water level. All of our public tools are accessible at sealevel.climatecentral.org/maps, and feel free to email us at sealevel@climatecentral.org with questions if you wish to use them in the future. Our tools are based on peer-reviewed published science, and the data we incorporate throughout our tools are drawn from federal sources such as NOAA, as well as our own peer-reviewed studies. Tens of thousands of coastal stakeholders have downloaded map images, slides, graphs, and fact sheets from our tools, and a portion of those who download our tools tell us how they intend to use our tools when they download these. So this is a word cloud visually showing the most commonly used words that they type in. So as you can see, and we filtered by the .gov email addresses just for this graphic, but as you can see, they use our tools for research, planning, presentations, risk assessments, emergency preparedness efforts, policy analysis, education, and much more. So there are two types of maps I'll be showing you today. The first allows you to view sea level rise and coastal flood risk by year. So you visit coastal.climatecentral.org and you can click Choose Map on the top left portion of the screen and choose the year map. And you can use the search bar in the top right to choose an interest, a location of interest to you. And this map, as you can see, utilizes Google Earth Engine and Google Maps. So any place you can find on Google Maps, you can also see in this map. You can use the year slider on the left panel to see what land is projected to be at risk from sea level rise combined with coastal flooding by decadal year from 2030 to 2100. And this particular map is set to show you the projected sea level rise plus an annual flood level on top of that, which is the flood level expected to occur once a year. Here we've moved the water slider to the year 2050 on the left side, and as you can see on the right, the red areas indicate the land that's projected to be below the annual flood level in that particular year. And here we've moved the slider to the year 2100. You can pan the map, and if you click Change Other Settings on the left-hand side, you're able to customize many of the map's inputs. So these inputs allow you to view sea level rise and coastal flood risk projections across time for multiple pollution and flood level scenarios. So you can see there's various settings here. The first slider at the top is projection type. This allows you to toggle between seeing land that is projected to be underwater from just sea level rise, or you could view sea level rise plus a common flood of certain depths. As I mentioned before, you can choose an annual flood level, which is a flood level expected to occur once per year, or you can choose a moderate flood level, which is higher and has a 10% chance of happening in a given year, or you can choose a major flood level, which is even higher and has a 1% annual chance. Here we're looking at the Tampa-St. Pete area of Florida, and this time we've selected a projection type of just sea level rise. The next slider below that is pollution scenario, which allows you to look at how different levels of carbon pollution will affect sea level rise. So there are three scenarios available: deep and rapid cuts, which corresponds to 1.5 Celsius or 2.5 Fahrenheit of warming and is the most ambitious goal of the Paris Accords. Or you can choose moderate cuts, which the tool defaults to, which corresponds to 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit and is the main goal of the Paris Accords. Or you can choose unchecked pollution, which we're using in this case, which corresponds to 3 to 4 degrees of Celsius of warming. And you can click the eye icons on the map to choose to learn much more about all of these scenarios. And here we're keeping the same settings, but you notice we're toggling from the year 2030 to 2060. So we provide the main settings on the left-hand side, and then for those of you who want to get under the hood, you can click Change Other Settings to see all these other settings. And we've moved the slider to 2100. So you can see the red areas on the right-hand side are adjusting accordingly. Here we've modified the projection type to include an annual flood level on top of sea level rise, so you can see how that impacts the map. And this is, we're using bathtub model here, and we're using NOAA's LiDAR data for those of you interested in that. And we're showing you, we're starting at the local high tide line. So, and here we've zoomed out and are looking at the broader coastline. We've chosen sea level rise only as the projection type and moderate pollution cuts. So this is showing you the South Carolina region. I wanted to explain the third slider, which is luck. You might wonder what that means, but it just refers to the fact that sea level rise models provide a range of possible outcomes. And so good luck just means that you're looking at the low end of the possible sea level rise range. Medium luck means the middle of the range, and bad luck is the high end. You're also able to choose whether or not you want to see areas that are below a flood or sea level, but potentially protected by coastal defenses like levees, natural ridges marked as at risk. And finally, you can choose which sea level rise model you wish to use. we'll be adding new sea level rise models as they come out in the future, as well as some of NOAA's models that we've used in our other tools. And here we've moved the water slider to 2100. We have another tool that shows you what's at risk by water level. So you can choose the water level under Choose Map button at the top left. And then you can view the risk from different water levels. You just use the slider on the left-hand side to choose what you would like. It goes down to 1/10 of a foot. As I mentioned, shows you the water levels above the local high tide line. We got a good amount of feedback from various coastal stakeholders before we built this tool, or as we were building it, about new features they wanted to see. And this continuous water slider was one of those that they wish we could incorporate. So we aim to incorporate future requests in the future. So we've moved the water slider from 1.2 to 1.5 feet. Here we're looking at Sarasota, Florida, 1.5 feet above the local high tide line, 3 feet. And you can zoom in quite a bit. And you can see the stores or the markets or other locations of interest via the Google Maps front end of the tool. And once you've configured all the settings, you can download or share the map using the buttons in the upper right next to the search bar. The download button allows you to download a high-resolution image of the map you're currently viewing. And the share button allows you to share the map you're currently looking at by email or on social media. If you want to learn more about the technical details and methodology behind the map, you can click Details and Limitations on the left-hand side. You can also view satellite view via Google Maps, the Google Maps front-end interface, with or without labels. And I finally wanted to mention that often people ask us if they can use our tools or the materials they generate from the tools in their own work or presentations, and we encourage this. So we welcome you to utilize our maps and tools or downloads for non-commercial purposes. And that covers the main functions of our new tool. And again, you can reach out to us at sealevel@climatecentral.org in the future. And Chris, maybe I'll hand it back over to you to see if there are any questions folks have we can address.
Sure, thank you, Dan. And I'm gonna leave my video off because I'm getting a notification that my internet is unstable.
Okay.
So apologies for that. We had one question come in specifically about the models of, well, I'll just read it. Which models of projected climate impacts are you using? And how are you accounting for the acceleration in rate of change? I know you described the different warming scenarios between 1.5 and 3 to 4 degrees. Can you give any more granularity on which models you're using and if you're accounting for acceleration in the rate of rise?
Sure, currently we're using Kopp et al. 2014 sea level rise model, which is a highly cited, respected model used across other tools and studies. And so that's a globally extensive, it's a probabilistic model, and it's built on average global projections from the IPCC. And it does incorporate future rise. There's another model you can choose, which is Bob Kopp's 2017 model as well, which incorporates more of the science from that was done on the disintegration in the Antarctic. Don may want to comment on as well on these kinds of models, but
sure.
There's a lot of information about the models in the tools themselves.
Yeah, we direct you to the little eye icon to read up on that. These were the same models used as inputs to NOAA's National Climate Assessment.
Okay, great. Just a reminder for folks, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Click the Q&A button and type in your question, and we'll work to get through as many as we can. Dan, what is the annual flood, the basis for the annual flood that you can put on top of the sea level rise projection?
Yeah, we have our own peer-reviewed research that looks at historic records across NOAA tide gauges, and we can point you to that. It's on our website, and that gives us the annual and 10-year and 100-year flood levels.
Okay, great. For the intermediate, I think, let's see, I think there was an intermediate scenario. There's a question about, is that intermediate high or extreme? Let's see, are these intermediate or intermediate high or extreme?
If you don't mind, Dan, I'll take that one.
Sure.
So NOAA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has chosen to present their model results as a set of scenarios. And they've labeled each with those terms, intermediate, high, extreme, etc. We don't present ours that way. Instead, we present ours as a probability distribution as described. So you will see the full range according to the carbon pollution scenario and the probability distribution, which we call luck for the general public, on our website.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for providing that clarity. Is there any input for regional variation? I'm guessing of sea level rise, or is that accounted for?
We take into account subsidence in our tools based on the closest tide gauge.
Okay.
These models are localized, and they will include ground effects such as subsidence.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Do major flood events include hurricane floodwaters?
The major flood level we incorporate does include historic hurricanes that occurred in the past. Anything we looked at, I didn't go into detail, but we looked at 30 years of hourly data from NOAA tide gauges and generated the levels based on those. So if the hurricanes occurred within that time period, then they're included.
Great. Okay, this is a question, kind of a more meta question about your tools and maps. Something I was wondering was, how do you see your tools being used, and if there are any particularly interesting or surprising or effective ways that you can see them used? And then someone asked specifically, what aspects of the maps do you think is the best way to move a Republican mayor of a small coastal town?
It's interesting. So I've done a number of tours across the country, and one of them was in Texas. So we met with local planners and officials, and it was just, I think, remarkable. They just really wanted to understand to see the visuals and get the data for their local city and town, and wanted to see if that could inform their own decision making and planning going forward. So we've had folks in South Carolina actually, like Frank Knapp at the Small Business Chamber of Commerce has used our tools with local mayors and our maps to convene local stakeholders in different sectors to talk about the implications of sea level rise on particular industries. So our maps are public, and anyone's allowed to use them. So, but we see that kind of use across the coastline. Maybe Don has other examples.
Sure. So an engineering company in San Diego used our tools to evaluate a site where they were planning on building a new water facility. There's an engineer in Oregon looking at wastewater treatment facilities and a community using our tools. We have folks along the East Coast doing the same. Anytime there's a storm that is blown up, our web traffic goes off the scale using the water slider feature Dan showed you. When a weathercaster is talking about 6 or 12 feet of storm surge, our traffic goes up as people are evaluating it. One of the most recent examples was Hurricane Florence in North Carolina. People were using our tools as that storm came ashore to see what the consequences of X amount of feet of water would be to their community.
I remember seeing, I can't remember which hurricane it was recently, and I live in Charleston, South Carolina, but we've just had this series of large storms threatening the Southeast and since 2016 every year. And I remember seeing lots of news reports citing, linking to the Climate Central maps in the news coverage of the storms. So I can say that I saw that from my end, and I saw people sharing on Facebook the sea level rise maps. People who I didn't even think necessarily paid that much attention to the issue of climate change or anything like that. And so I thought it was really neat to see kind of just typical people who, I interact with lots of people in a professional setting who are very kind of immersed in climate and energy. But it was neat to see people who are not those people, who don't think about it all the time. Where, it was getting shared a lot. And I thought that was really neat.
Regarding the question about the local mayor, sea level rise and coastal flooding is happening now. It's happening frequently, and it's happening in many locations. As a consequence, there are a lot of people who are getting wet, and their stuff is getting wet. When you go work at the water's edge like we do, we don't see politics. You can't tell who in the room is Republican, Democrat, or whatever. People are coming together to address the problem and the consequences of the problem.
Great, thank you for that. There's a technical issue someone points out. I'm not sure if one of you can maybe speak to this. They say the slider bar panel is in front of the map, preventing me from seeing the map. I'm not sure if there's any technical pointers you have.
Well, that was because Dan was showing you a PowerPoint slide. If you go to the URL itself, you won't have that experience. So go to coastal.climatecentral.org and try it for yourself.
Great, thanks. All right, now this is the final question I have in front of me right now, and it's a good maybe segue into moving to the other tools. Here's a question. Do you recommend any Climate Central tools to show more immediate or short-term impacts of climate changes? One of our biggest challenges is showing people that it won't take until 2050 to experience impacts of climate changes. So I'll put that out for you, and then if you want to, maybe if there's another demonstration later on that you want to defer that to, that's fine, but I'll leave that with you, and then Dawn, if you want to get into your presentation from there, that'd be great.
Thank you, I will, and I defer that question to Karen. She's got some material that will speak to it. We'll be glad to help you on that regard. Let me share my screen. Did you see something change? See something that says,
we got your screen, thank you.
Great. I should say welcome to COVID TV and Zoom once again. And so our maps are great and the public loves them. We have, in fact, millions of page views with our maps, but we have a number of clients, users, and other stakeholders for which they're not particularly convenient. An example might be an insurance company comes to us and says, hey, I've got 10,000 properties at the coast. I would like to understand what the risk is of coastal flooding. And stand by, I'm having trouble advancing. There we go. In order to address that, we took the same technology that Dan showed you that powers the back end, that is the same flood statistics, the same models, etc., and made them available through a web service that accepts spreadsheet inputs of large numbers of locations. We call this thing the portfolio analysis tool. It's commonly used for insurance policies, for corporate assets. One New Jersey county ran all of the buildings through in their county through the tool. The way it works is it answers the question, what is the expected flood risk at any location, virtually any location in the United States and the world. We implement it as a is a web service, so all I need to do to use it is have access to a browser, and I submit a spreadsheet to it, and I get spreadsheet results back. Let me give you a few of the use cases that will help illustrate the way it works. The first was done for a homeowners association. The person that lives in that house on the left side of your screen is the president of a homeowners association in Connecticut. And this particular neighborhood has been excluded from the seawall that the local township is planning to build, and they wanted to understand what the consequences of that might be. So this homeowners association president came to us and put a bunch of points on a map. That's the pins you see on the right side. Each one of these points has a latitude and longitude. We put that in a spreadsheet that you see in the middle of the screen. Column A is simply what she decided to name each one of those pins. Column B is the latitude, and column C is the longitude for each one of those locations. So we take that, submit it to Pat, and get results. The results look like this. This is another spreadsheet example. The way you read this, the far left column is the pin. So you saw pins on the map. Those are the pin numbers. That second column is the ID. This is what the Homeowners Association president decided to name each one of those pins. And then the columns with the colors are the results. These are the expected annual flood events in future years. The first column is for 2020, second column 2030, 2040, and so forth, all the way across the screen to 2100. The number you see for small numbers can be thought of as the flood probability. So that first one is 0.1, sorry, and that's approximately a 10% annual chance. Those numbers range from small numbers like the ones in yellow, anything 0.01, 0.01 and greater is a 1% annual chance, which is the common definition of a flood zone in the United States. Anything 0.1 or greater, that's a 10% annual chance. We've color-coded orange. And anything that is 1 or greater is expecting to flood at least once every year. So I've zoomed in to show you so you could read the numbers. Let me back out for this neighborhood. This is that entire neighborhood. And as you can see, it's in trouble. So it is experiencing flooding now and is expected to only increase as the century moves on. There's only one point in that neighborhood that wouldn't be considered in a flood zone now. We apply this to a variety of use cases. Here's a case where we run Pat on a hospital. This one happens to be in Boston. You can see, we've chosen points around the perimeter of the hospital, and you can see some of them are expected to flood with that increasing. You also see we return the elevation numbers associated with those points. Elevation numbers in the United States come from NOAA's LIDAR data set, and that makes it particularly convenient for some of the use cases like I've described, including the engineers. This kind of tool is great for screening. It doesn't replace actually doing an on-the-ground survey, but it's very handy for checking large numbers of probability of properties and understanding what the risk might be. Another example is we've run Pat on, in this case, the Port of New Jersey. In fact, we've run it on all ports in the United States, all major ports in the United States. On the left are pins of locations we chose on that port. We chose them strategically. We chose docks, cargo areas, rail segments, and road segments, and submitted them to Pat. Here's what the results look like. They're not as bad as the neighborhood, but they're serious. And this is common for ports. Of course, they're built at the water's edge, and they're built at very low elevations. Turns out the Port of Newark is very flat, and consequently the cargo docks, roads, rail segments have the same kind of shape in their output. The one you can see on the right has a little bit different shape because it's not as flat. The reason we break it down this way, docks, rail, roads, is because we found that with just a few $1 million, you can update update the docks, adapt the docks. However, a port can't function unless you also take into account adapting the roads and the rail segments that serve it. Why do we do this? Well, there are places like, this is a hypothetical customer with distribution centers in the Southeast who's dependent on ports, and they might want to understand what their risk is of various port options that they use. We apply this to a variety of other use cases. Here's an example. We ran it for 22,455 homes built in the state of Delaware in year 2010 or later. 1,476 of them are in a flood zone now. By 2050, 372 homes will be added to that flood zone. That's the consequence of the rising sea. And what that means is that there are 372 families out there who aren't in a flood zone now, but likely will be and don't know it. So if you followed our work, you might have seen us in the press as we ran all of the coastal homes in the Zillow database through this same tool and generated an assessment for that, which was widely reported in the news media. We've run it on residences, commercial properties, and industrial facilities. This is a insurance company. We ran it on their corporate headquarters. And like many cases, we find that the buildings themselves may not be at any risk, however, or at major risk. However, access to the building often is, and the consequences will have impact to their operations. Many of our clients find this very interesting and useful because now they have the basis to approach their city or their county to ask for appropriate investment in the infrastructure like the roads in order to protect their investment. We've applied this to industrial facilities. This is many of these facilities are built at the water's edge because of transportation concerns. This is an example of the Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery. We cast points all about that refinery. Now that you've learned how the colors work, you see on the right that location's in trouble. This is even more trouble because the facility's gone bankrupt after a fire, and it's not at all clear who's going to be responsible for cleaning this facility up. Even now, while it's above water, as you look at the colors on the analysis, this will become part of the marine environment and will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to clean up after it becomes part of the bay. So that's PAT. We're using it in a variety of cases. We welcome a chance to try it out. If any of you have interesting use cases, contact us. We'll be glad to run it through as a courtesy. Most often that happens with company executives or company team members running the boss's beach house through it and delivering the bad news. That's it from me.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions for Dawn about the portfolio analysis tool? Please type them in to the Q&A box if you have any. We'll wait for just a moment to see if any come in. Okay, I have one question that's more of a kind of broad overarching question, so I'll save that until after Karen's, and we'll get to that. So why don't we transition now to Karen?
Great, thanks so much. Here I go sharing my screen. I'm going to talk about two more tools. One's called Weather Power, the other's called Climate Matters, and then I'll give a sneak preview at the very end of something else we've got coming along. Weather Power is a tool that combines actual installed capacity data for wind and solar for communities around the country, combines that with their actual yesterday's weather and their today's and tomorrow's forecasted weather, so that you can get information on the quantity of renewable electricity being generated on a locality by locality basis. So if you go to weatherpower.climatecentral.org, what you see first is this screen. So if you want a statewide analysis, you just pick the state. If after you've picked a state, you decide you want to look at subdivisions within the state, you can pick a media market, a county, or a congressional district. So here I've selected North Carolina, then Raleigh-Durham. As you scroll down, it'll then give you options. First one is to decide whether you want a wind one or a solar one. The background is probably not relevant for most users outside of TV meteorologists, who are the people for whom we designed the tool in the first instance, but it's publicly available and anybody is welcome to use it. And you pick the days you're interested in, then you pick the equivalency rows, not just the amount of electricity generated, but things such as the amount, the equivalent number of homes that are powered by that amount of electricity, and so forth. It does turn out that the most popular one by far is equivalent number of smartphones charged. So I've selected that one here. Then you download the graphic, find whatever location you want on your computer for it, and you get something that looks like that. This is ready to be used on television or in social media or in presentations like this one. If you scroll down further, you see the full printout of all the different components of it. And then if you click down here at what do these values mean, you see a lot of definitions. And if you really want to get into the weeds, you can click on view the full methodology and you get a 28-page single-spaced paper. As I mentioned, Weather Power was initially generated by us for our group of meteorologists that we work with, more than 900 around the United States. That's nearly half of the ones in the whole United States, covering 90% plus of media markets. We also have hundreds of journalists in the program. Every week we generate a bulletin, short bulletin with multiple graphics, typically localized to the individual media market. And then that's available to the meteorologists or others to use on the air and in social media. We generally peg this to something that's going on at that time of year. So in the summer, we're talking a lot about how hot it is. And here's an example for Houston. Another example for Miami, which is the heat index. Then we'll, in the spring or other times, often be talking about how hard it's raining out. And in the winter, point out that it's not as cold as often as it used to be. Then we'll often also include why that matters, not just in terms of the temperature trend, but what the impacts of this are. So for example, here, less cold matters because the fruit trees and other fruits that need cold in order to grow in the following year don't do as well. We also have projections as well as trends to date. And I should emphasize in response to the earlier question that most of what we are presenting is what's going on right now. So with projections, however, we also do present those, and someone could say, hey, you love that 95-degree day we were having? Here's what we're in store for if pollution levels keep up as they have been. We also have explainers that show things about the very basics of the climate problem and things that show why just a little small, this should be moving. It should be shifting over. I don't understand why it's not. That shows just why a small change in averages means a big change in extremes. And we connect things to stuff that people really care about, like allergy seasons and how a longer growing season translates into a longer allergy season, how more warm days translate into additional days that mosquitoes can share diseases. We also go for the lighter side from time to time, like holidays, temperature trends such around Christmas, football season, and beer. Beer was an extremely popular one for us. When we send these out, it's not just the individual graphics and the backgrounder graphics, it's also a number of paragraphs of text and context. We always have a methodology paragraph, so you know where we're getting that information from, and they're all available in Spanish as well as English. Increasingly, we're looking at solutions. It's one of the reasons we did the weather power tool. We've also been doing some work on carbon in soils. All of these are available on our website. If you go to the climatecentral.org website, click on our media library, then go down and you can use the market means media market, and then you select the state and the locality of interest. We produce for 244 media markets, which is all the media markets in the United States. They together cover the entire country. What we're doing now is we want to scale up distribution on a just-in-time basis, right stuff to the right folks at the right time. This is going to use everything that we've seen today, from the coastal map tools to the weather power tools to the other materials from our Climate Matters program. We're doing this at scale by using sophisticated software systems. We're automatically for the weather, checking the weather throughout the entire United States for anomalous conditions. When something pops up, we're then able to pair that with some of our materials that say, looks like you're having unusual weather in whatever location. Here's some materials that might be helpful if you're going to report or talk about that topic. We're also eventually going to be adding calendar events such as first day of school, beginning of hunting season, et cetera, and then some intermittent events like coastal floods and so forth. The audience for this is, again, media, meteorologists, journalists, but also NGOs, educators, states and local governments, and whoever else wants to use it. This is currently in a beta testing situation. We are expecting to roll it out in the next few months to come. Whatever information that we're providing, everything that Climate Central is doing, virtually everything we're making available through our website, and whoever is interested in that information is welcome to use it as they see fit. We do ask that you cite it, source it back to us, and acknowledge our contribution to making that material available. But you don't have to ask for our permission on an individual basis for non-commercial uses. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Great. So again, if anyone has questions, please click the Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions, and we will work to get through as many as we can. We have plenty of time. And I see Karen, someone asked if you can share the URL again.
And I'm sorry, that the weather power slides are supposed to have URL on it, and I realized as I was showing them that somehow that fell off. It's weatherpower.climatecentral.org, and you can also find it by going to our website and looking in the media library.
Okay, great. And so we have a couple overarching questions about policy, how your work is being used or can be used to help affect policy. And I know that's something that, Dan, you spoke about earlier in terms of your sea level rise tool being shared with local decision makers. So I guess just a broad question for all three of you. Is your work being used to advocate climate policy legislation such as reducing greenhouse gases? Or do you see any other kind of foreseeable possibilities for how your tool could be used? And I'll just say, I'll chime in for a second and say one of the tools that I think was briefly touched on today, but I'm not sure if you demonstrated the interactive feature of it. The mapping choices tool, I've really appreciated, where you can see actually what are the different impacts if greenhouse gases are curbed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees versus more. And actually, now that I talk about it, that's now integrated into your sea level rise tool. So that's great. But do you guys want to talk a little bit more about how your work is able to be used for policy?
Well, that's really up to the folks in the advocacy community, how they want to use it. We will do briefings along this line to show folks how to utilize our tools when government folks ask us to come in and show them the results that pertain to their locality, we're happy to do that as well, and often have. But really, these are informational tools. Climate Central very explicitly is not an advocacy organization, so we do not advocate for any particular technologies or policies ourselves. What we do is create information that can be used by the media, by advocates, by others, by educators, by state and local governments themselves, based on their needs for their communities.
That's right. Anyone can use our tools. We do see advocacy groups using our tools for what was mentioned in the question. And we support anyone who comes in to answer questions about our tools.
Great. Thank you for making them available. There's a question about vulnerable communities. How can we use the tools to perhaps in conjunction with something like Zillow, to see how vulnerable communities are potentially more impacted? Do you have anything in your tools that specifically addresses vulnerable or marginalized communities?
Maybe Don wants to take this, but I wanted to mention that in our risk zone map, we do have layers that show a social vulnerability layer, which is taken from Susan Cutter at the University of South Carolina. And so it takes into account about 29 socioeconomic variables, and you can view those layers in our tool along with other layers like income level and other variables that could be relevant.
In addition, we have a tool at riskfinder.org where if you put in your community and scroll down, you can see what is at risk in terms of people, buildings, road, infrastructure, hospitals, etc., at each water level. We have lots of people using that in order to convey answers to the questions, what's at risk. It's particularly important, between storms, because, for some reason, Americans have disaster amnesia, and yeah, it's a good way to bring it up and work on it.
Actually, I'd like to reshare my screen and show another quick set of slides that I realized might be of interest to folks from the Risk Finder tool to give folks a sense of what that looks like. So Risk Finder, you put in your location anywhere in the United States, and again, it's riskfinder.climatecentral.org. You get it's a long scrolling page with a number of elements. I think the most interesting ones are the what is at risk section, which allows you to look at population. Because this is a PowerPoint, I can't actually scroll down, but there are additional ethnic groups that are shown, that this is ranked by number of people. So depending on the particular number of folks in that community, you'll see them show up in a different location, but the overall population of color is also listed. It allows you also to see buildings such as medical facilities, public safety facilities, colleges, et cetera, and infrastructures such as roads and airports, et cetera, and contamination risks such as Superfund sites and so forth. So there is a fair amount of other localized information. This is a complicated tool. At some point, we hope to integrate this into a somewhat easier to navigate set of indices, but this is what we have right now. The individual, the user picks the water level of interest, and as they shift this number up and down, then these numbers change accordingly. This is also in Spanish as well as English. So that's a little extra something for today's presentation.
Thank you. We have one last question, and then we'll close it out. Someone asks, is your work informing investment in Florida development? It's kind of specific, but do you have any idea? I'm not sure what the context is.
Maybe my colleagues have answered that. We do see a lot of stakeholders in Florida downloading our information tools, county planners, city planners, those from the private sector. So we see the use of our tool in that regard.
We don't always know what, what people are using our information for. However, we do have major financial services firms using our information to answer questions about, property assets, locations, etc.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I strongly suspect that your work is being used to inform some of those decisions. Well,
As it should be yet, though.
right. Well, Dan, Dawn, and Karen, I want to say thank you very much for the great presentation today, and also for your wonderful work in making these tools available for advocacy organizations, NGOs, local governments, everybody in general. They're very helpful, and so thank you for sharing them with us and explaining them to us so we can help communicate
I want to
better.
make clear that we welcome suggestions from users about ways we can make this more valuable. We are literally in a couple of weeks going to be launching a redesign of our website, starting the process of redesigning our website to make our materials more findable through our media library, and the real-time climate tool that I was mentioning at the end will also be available later this year for NGOs to subscribe to, and we're going to be looking for input from and feedback from all the user groups as to how to make that as useful to them as possible. So we actively solicit your responses and feedback.
And we thank you for your interest in the interest of the Southern Alliance Clean Energy members for your interest in our work. So keep in touch. We'd like to hear from you.
This was the best part of our day.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you to our presenters, and thank you to all our attendees who joined today. Make sure to check out the tools at climatecentral.org. And also, if you enjoyed the presentation, please consider joining SACE so that we can continue bringing you webinars like these and highlighting work like this and working towards a clean energy solutions for the Southeast. You can visit our website at cleanenergy.org for information on how you can join and become involved. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.